What's up, YouTube? This is the 82 podcast. This time we're taking a look at Julius Erving, aka Dr. J. Now, Erving was born February 22nd, 1950, in East Meadow, New York, and he was raised from the age of 13 up in Roosevelt, New York. So he attended Roosevelt High School, and that's actually where he got his nickname, Dr. J. It was a high school friend of his named Leon Sanders who gave him that name. So Erving would go on and enroll at the University of Massachusetts in 1968. And he's one of the only players in NCAA history, one of six, to put up 20 rebounds per game. And in 2 years of college basketball, he averaged 26.3 points per game and 20.2 rebounds per game. And he would enroll what was called at the time the hardship entry. So what this means was the NBA and at the time had a competitor league called the ABA. And the ABA wasn't quite as popular as the NBA because you got to keep in mind the NBA has been around since 1946. And the ABA started in like 68 or 69. It wasn't as popular, but it was still rivaling the NBA, and it was taking a lot of the talent. Now, how they took a lot of the talent was they were less strict about their rules on how to get in. So they took players out of high school. The NBA had a rule you weren't eligible to be drafted until after your fourth year of college. So even if you drop out, like let's say, I'm just going to make up a year. You go to college, you enroll in 2018, right? You're not eligible to be drafted until 2022, even if you dropped out in 2019. So the ABA, they didn't care about that rule, and they had a hardship rule, which meant players who were in financial need could just make that jump. But an interesting fact is 15 years later, and I think in 1986, Erving would actually get a bachelor's degree in creative leadership and administration from the school through University Without Walls program because he wanted to fulfill a promise that he made to his mom to get a degree. So he signs a contract, a 4-year contract worth $500,000 spread over 4 years with the Virginia Squires, with the ABA. And the Virginia Squires, like most ABA teams, were struggling financially. A lot of these ABA teams promised players big money for the time. I'm serious. Big money. And they couldn't fulfill a lot of their contract obligations. This is why a lot of teams folded. Now, to make matters worse, the Milwaukee Bucks in the 1972 draft picked him in the first round, 12th overall, even though he was ineligible due to their rules. And just imagine how dominant the Milwaukee Bucks would have been. This is a year after their championship. Picture Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, and Dr. J on one team. It's madness. And prior to the draft, Julius Erving signed with the Atlanta Hawks. He signed a $1 million contract with a $250,000 bonus. But the signing with the Hawks came after a dispute with the Squires, where he demanded a renegotiation of the terms. He discovered at the time Steve Arnold was employed by the Squires and convicted him to sign below market contract. Now, think about how crazy this is, because he could have been on the Hawks with Pete Maravich. And he even went to training camp with Pete Maravich and the Hawks. So he could have potentially won a championship, I think, with the Hawks or the Bucks had he played. I'm thinking he would have led the Hawks to a championship if him and Pete played together. Lou Hudson. But to put it short, they fined the Hawks $25,000 per game in violation of this ruling because the Bucks wanted to sue them for Erving. They said we drafted him while the Squires were going to court to get his It was a mess. The Squires of the ABA were fighting for him. The Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA were fighting for him, and the Atlanta Hawks of the NBA were fighting for him. And on October 2nd, there was a judge. He issued an injunction that prohibited him from playing for any team other than the Squires. That's how they ruled. So the judge sent the case to be official, and so he agreed to play with the Squires. And that's it. Now, like I said, picture the favor going any other way. Let's say the judge favored the Hawks. He goes and plays with Pete Maravich. Let's say he favored the Bucks. That would be a dynasty right there. Now, I don't even think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would have left if him and Dr. J were winning up into the mid-'80s. I don't know. It's all speculation. But he goes to the ABA for the Virginia Squires, and he has a really great career there. He puts up one of the best rookie campaigns in history. For his rookie season, he averages 31 points per game and 15.7 rebounds per game. And he would play 2 years with the Virginia Squires. He would also put up 2.5 steals per game and 1.8 blocks. And in his rookie campaign on the Virginia Squires, they would go 55-39. And they would lose in the second round, which was called the ABA Divisional Finals, to the New York Nets in Game 7. Now, his second year there, however, they didn't have as good of a record, going 42-42. And it's a shame that the NBA got robbed of this young Julius Erving. I know we got to see glimpses of him on what he would become later on the Sixers, but I don't think people realize how good the ABA version of him was. So the Squires, like most ABA teams, were on really shaky financial ground. And so the Virginia Squires were, to put it long story short, struggling. I can't stress that enough. They were desperate to the point where they sold the rights of Julius Erving to another ABA team, the New York Nets, which today are the Brooklyn Nets, for an 8-year deal, which he would make $350,000 per year. And he would lead them to 2 championships. In 74, where he defeats the Utah Stars, and in 76, which would be the final season there. Now, the end of the 75-76 season, this would be the ABA-NBA merger. The Nets, Nuggets, and Spurs would all go, and the Pacers, of course, would all go to the NBA. And all the other players in the ABA would be in a dispersal draft. So he would get selected by the Philadelphia 76ers. And I think one thing that doesn't get talked about enough is Julius Erving's ABA career. This was his peak performance. And it's sad because the NBA won't ever recognize his stats due to the merger, and they won't recognize the championships he won. But he goes to the NBA, Philadelphia 76ers, his first season there. He's on, wins 50 games, and they go to the finals against the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, this Portland Trail Blazers team They won a championship that year. And they were supposed to lose this. The Philadelphia 76ers were the favorites. And it's sad because think about what that would have done for Julius Erving's all-time resume. If his first year over in the NBA, he wins a championship. But it didn't happen. Bill Walton, who was an MVP, he was supposed to be this next up-and-coming star. He was supposed to lead the league into what it was supposed to become. He was supposed to be next in line to be a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or a Wilt Chamberlain. So we all know about his injuries and everything and how it falls apart. But let's talk about how the Sixers team falls apart. They had a 2-0 lead in the series, right? And it collapses after that because Game 3, the Portland Trailblazers win 129-107. Bill Walton has 20 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 steals, and 4 blocks. And Julius Erving, on the other hand, he puts up a good game. But it's his team that couldn't get it done. He puts up 28 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block. Game 4. Blazers blow him out, 130-98. Like I said, Erving, he's not putting up great performances, but he's holding his own. He puts up 24 points on 50% shooting, but the rest of his team was shooting poor. And going into Game 5, Portland wins 110-104. Erving has 37 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, 1 steal, 2 blocks. So you can't really blame Erving for these losses. And that Game 6 was a very close game. Portland won 109-107. Bill Walton would have 20 points, 23 rebounds, 7 assists, and 8 blocks. Insane stat line. And Julius Erving would have 40 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block. So you can't really blame Julius Erving for the loss. He came correct. He brought his A game on. Now, going into the 77-78 season, Gene Shue, who was their coach, they would fire him 6 games into the season after going 2-4. Then they would bring over Billy Cunningham. And this team would finish off at 55-27. But they would lose in the second round against the Washington Bullets. Now, the 79 season, they would lose in 7 games in the Eastern Conference semifinals against the Spurs. That's back when the Spurs were in the Eastern Conference. Now, the 79-80 season, they would go 59-23. And Julius Erving and the Sixers would go to the finals. And we all know how this works. The famous 1980 finals. This is where they were matched up against the Los Angeles Lakers with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in his prime and Magic Johnson, who was a rookie. Now, realistically speaking, the Sixers should have won the series because Kareem Abdul-Jabbar went out for that Game 6. He wasn't there. And prior to that, the Lakers were up 3-2. So the Sixers should have won that Game 6. Kareem wasn't there. He was the captain. And despite Julius Erving's 27 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks on an elite 56% shooting, doing everything he can, Johnson would be possessed. He'd go out there and score 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block, winning Finals MVP, defeating them 123-107. So, Julius Erving had all these accolades in the ABA, but he hasn't got it done in the NBA yet. Now, going into the 81 season, this is when you started to see just how great the Sixers team is individually, but needing just a piece away from a championship caliber. They went 62-20, and they would go all the way to the Eastern Conference semifinals, where they would lose to Boston in 7 games. And this 7th game, Boston only won by 1 point. They won 91-90. So, realistically speaking, the Celtics, who would go on to win the championship that year, Julius Erving was really only 1 point away from a championship. If he would have scored 1 basket, he might have been a championship. He might have been a champion. So, he's getting a lot of unfair criticism. People are calling him a loser. Oh, he can win in the ABA, but he can't win in the NBA. And a lot of it's unfair because the team matchups. Now in the 82 season, they go back to the NBA Finals. And this time, they beat the Celtics in 7 games in the semifinal or the conference finals. And they just completely obliterate them in that game 7, 120-106. But going into the finals, the Lakers take it in 6. And you can't really say that Julius Erving was the reason why they lost. He put up a pretty solid 25 points per game, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1.8 steals. And this is when his team started to develop more. Andrew Toney would average 26 points in that series. Maurice Cheeks would be a 14 points and 8 assist guy. And that offseason, this is, to put it in a modern lens, a modern context. Remember when Kevin Durant joined the Warriors? How crazy the world went. Well, picture this, right? Moses Malone, who's probably the best player in the world at this time, goes over and joins the Philadelphia 76ers, who already had Julius Erving, Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks. So think about how crazy the basketball world would have been back then. It was actually a trade. It wasn't a signing like with Golden State and Durant. So Moses Malone, who he had been having some success. I mean, he made the finals in 1981 with the Rockets, but he just did not have a good team. And Moses Malone himself is a 3-time MVP. He would win the MVP in 79, 81, and he would win 83, which is their first full year together. So this is pretty similar to when Kevin Durant, who's an MVP, joins Steph Curry, who's a MVP. And then imagine if Durant would have won MVP in that first year with the Warriors. So Erving gets his first championship in the NBA in the 82-83 season. They go 65-17, and this is one of the best NBA teams of all time. And they go to the finals, and they correct their wrongs against the Lakers. They defeat them 4-0. And it's just an incredible series because the matchup down low between Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Moses Malone is incredible. Moses liked to play very physical down low, and this is something that Kareem struggled with. He was more of a finesse player. He only averaged 7 rebounds per game, Kareem did. Moses would average 18 points per game, 18 rebounds per game for that series. And The finals MVP would be Moses Malone. Obviously, he's the best player. And this is when the Philadelphia Sixers would start to fall apart. They're supposed to repeat. They're supposed to be like this dynasty at this point. But that doesn't happen, unfortunately. The 83-84 season, they would only go 52-30. This team, they caught a lot of breaks too because they would get Charles Barkley the following year via the draft. And so think about this. The 84-85 Sixers, they had Moses Malone at the center. They had Charles Barkley at the power forward. They had Julius Erving at the small forward. And Andrew Toney at shooting guard. And Maurice Cheeks at point guard. Then you have Bobby Jones, who is all defense coming off the bench. This team should have won a championship. Charles Barkley should have got a championship. But they didn't get it done. Like I said, they went 58-24 and 84-85. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals. And now I should mention the conference rounds are getting longer. These are now 4 rounds. And Boston destroys them. They win 4-1. And this is when you started to see Julius Erving really slow down. He put up 14 points for that series on a horrible 32% shooting. So you started to see him slow down a little bit. He wasn't as athletic as he used to be. He wasn't jumping out of the gym anymore. And the 85-86 season, they go 54-28. And this team had Bob McAdoo this time, who was a former MVP. And I know he's well past his prime at this point. Bob McAdoo was 34. Julius Erving was 35 at this point. Moses Malone was 30. And he was still playing pretty good. Charles Barkley was 22. So it was pretty much Barkley and a bunch of older vets. But they still should have won it, in my opinion. They should have won a championship. They go 7 games with the Milwaukee Bucks in the semifinals, and they lose in this horrible, horrible Game 7. Horrible if you're a Sixers fan. They lose it 112-113. So, Erving has one of the worst games because he only goes 6 for 17 from the field, putting up 35% shooting. And it also should be noted that Moses Malone wasn't playing in that Game 7. He wasn't playing in that series. So that's a big asterisk on the Sixers team. Had Moses Malone played against the Bucks, had he been healthy for that series, would they have won the championship that year? And I know the Celtics were 66-16 that year. But do you think if this Sixers team would have been healthy, do you think they would have had enough gas in the tank to defeat the Celtics? Because Moses Malone was still at his best. He wasn't the younger MVP Malone. He was a 23-point per game scorer, 11 rebound per game. Barkley was starting to blossom, 20 points per game, 12 rebounds, 2 steals per game. Erving, like I said, he was falling off, 18 points per game. But it didn't happen. And unfortunately, the 86-87 season would be his final season. They only went 45-37. And a lot of that is injuries. He only played 60 games that year. And they got rid of Moses Malone, which is what affected Charles Barkley to leave later, because he really liked playing under Moses Malone. He looked at him as like a mentor in this league. And when the Sixers got rid of Moses Malone, this would cause a rift. So you could see this whole organization falling apart after this. They should have won another championship, but due to a combination of injuries and age, it didn't happen. Like I said, in that offseason in 86, it was June 16th, 1986. They traded Moses Malone to the Bullets for Cliff Robinson and Jeff Rulland, which doesn't make much sense because Malone was still contributing. Like I said, had he been healthy for that 85-86, they might have won. And they were looking at it like he was getting too old. But 86-87, he was an all-star. 87-88, he was an all-star. 88-89, he was an all-star. So he still had a few good years in him. And we all know he would go on to play until the 95-96 season. But I'm getting beyond myself a little bit here. It's about Erving. But it all plays into it. So the team fell apart because injuries and bad trades. And so 86-87, it was sad to see. That'd be Erving's last year. And Barkley, who was just 23 at the time, realistically should have had a ring by now. And the 87-88 Sixers would go 36 wins, would only win 36. And 88-89, they'd win 46. So this team was never able to get back to title contention. So Julius Erving got robbed of a couple championships, I'd say. And not counting the ABA championships, that really counts as legacy. So I think this is why he falls off quite a bit in discussions now in the GOAT conversation. But nonetheless, he's the top player of all time. Like I said, he has one official NBA championship in 1983. He's got 2 ABA championships. He's 7-time All-NBA, 5-time All-ABA. He's a 4-time MVP if you want to count the ABA championships. And he did win an MVP in the NBA. And that was in 1981, where he put up 24.6 points per game, 8.0 rebounds, and 4.4 assists. So let me know what you guys think of Julius Erving. Is he in your top 10? He's kind of fallen off in recent memory, but let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.